So now I'm super excited to introduce our climate resilience panel moderated by Ashley Gower. So Ashley, can I invite you on screen?
Hi, Natalie. Great. We ready? Okay, well, thank you, Natalie, and everyone at Regeneración for inviting me and our powerhouse panelists to partake in Regeneración's third climate forum today. It's been super grounding and super educational so far. Mahalo, thank you to all our prior presenters. A few reminders for our audience as we segue into this next part of our program. We'll ask you to make a few audio interpretation switches from English to Spanish and vice versa throughout the discussion. Also, feel free to log your questions using the Q&A box during the panel discussion, which we'll try to answer all during Q&A, and if not, we'll answer them through an email post-forum. So to start, I'm happy to represent the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, to which we'll include a link in the chat box for folks to learn more about our initiatives in housing, broadband infrastructure, workforce development, and climate change, and how we collaborate with our members and partners on intersectoral regional solutions where equity, environmental stewardship, and economic vitality lie at the forefront. You can also learn more about upcoming events such as our Housing Element Kickoff on March 12th, the Central Coast Climate Action Summit on March 31st, and our annual Economic Summit on May 6th. Please join us and make your voice heard. Speaking of the economy, and to complement Monica's study, in the US alone, as most of you may or may not know, roughly 2.5 million women have left the workforce since the onset of the pandemic, with Black, Hispanic, and single moms amongst the hardest hit. And as Vice President Kamala Harris poignantly stated, the mass exodus of women from the working world is a national emergency that requires a national solution, end quote. I can't express how timely it is for Regeneración and CSUMB to come together to focus on how the climate emergency, of which the pandemic is part, disproportionately impacts girls and women. Essential roles in play. More importantly, how women are stepping up in their gender and climate activism, and how our panelists today are working towards social and environmental justice while building climate resilient communities. So without further ado, I'm honored to have this opportunity to introduce you all to our incredibly diverse, multicultural, multi-generational panel, all of whom embody and embrace their multifaceted roles as women and leaders in their families, in their communities, and field of work. We have Nayeli Gallardo, a sustainable energy specialist, Natasha Burr, a landscape designer, Mireya Gomez Contreras, co-leader at Esperanza Community Farms, and Ermilina Vasquez, project member of Esperanza Community Farms as well. Welcome, ladies. Let's go ahead and dive into it and begin by having each of you share a little bit about your story. So Nayeli and Natasha, if you could join us now as young professionals in your field, tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today and how you and or others you know have been affected by climate impacts, genderism, ageism, and other forms of injustice. Nayeli, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley, and thank you to Regeneración for this. So a bit about me. I was born in Jalisco in Mexico, and I grew up mostly in Greenfield in the Salinas Valley of California. My family and I immigrated to the US following sort of an American dream, and my parents knew that education was the way to pursue this dream and to achieve it. So they always supported our education, and we are super blessed to have been also in a community that supported us as we pursued that dream. So through our school, our church, and organizations like Girls Inc., we got a lot of support from the community. So eventually I ended up at Stanford, and I had to choose a major, of course, to study. I was very drawn to the natural world and how it works and how helpful it can be to apply what we know from the natural world to solving people's problems. So I ended up majoring in civil engineering. And after all, engineering and technology is basically about applying what we know from math and from science into solving some problem. So that really drew me to this. And within civil engineering, I was really interested in water and environment. So fast forward a bit, and I was working in the energy sector in Mexico City, where I realized that I had this passion for sustainable energy. And after a few years, I decided to specialize in this, and I moved to Europe to study a master's in sustainable energy systems with EIT InnoEnergy. I've recently returned to the US, hoping to apply this to the domestic energy challenges. And I'm joining in from Chicago, which has for centuries been a meeting place of Native peoples. I live here with my husband, and I'm happy to be joining here. I think I'd just like to highlight from my experience the role that my mentors and my role models and my peers have played in my choosing a STEM field and staying in it, because engineering was something absolutely foreign to me growing up and to my family. And being a minority in energy, I think it's very easy to get to fall into self-doubt. So for me, it's been very important to have supportive mentors and peers as I navigate all of this. So now I'm happy to be in the sector, and I see my role as a woman here, not only as a professional in the energy sector, but also as a bridge to bring also more women and more girls into the sector. It's interesting, but historically, women have been energy managers in their own households, and that's still the case in a lot of in many parts of the world. So women have been in charge of gathering the food and the wood and other water, etc., to make sure that everything's okay at home. And today, still 3 billion people rely heavily on heavily polluting fuels to cook and to keep their house warm, etc. And because of this, still 3 million people die each year from the air pollution inside their home. So without even counting what's going on outside, that's more than COVID. And it's really important because it's mostly women and children who are breathing in this polluted air. So there's a lot to women and energy than we usually recognize, but still only 32% of women, or only 32% of jobs in renewable energy are held by women, and that's only 22% in energy overall, not renewable. So I think that this is a big problem because energy is very important. We use it to get from point A to point B, to keep our homes cool or warm, to work equipment that can be life-changing in hospitals. So we really can't stay out of this. We need women and girls on the table to figure out how to make energy truly sustainable, truly reliable, and truly affordable. So that's what I'd like to leave you all with. And now let's go to Natasha Burr, who is a landscape designer joining us from the San Francisco Bay Area.
Hi, everyone. And then just another reminder to speak slowly. I know we have a lot to cover, but for our interpreters, thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that, Natalie. I'm Natasha Burr. I was raised by my multi-ethnic immigrant parents in the state of Georgia. They are passionate artists that impressed upon me the importance of maintaining my cultural roots. I'm from the Kumhar caste, and we are potters. So I found pottery to be a gateway that connected me with art and nature, which then led me to finding the field of landscape architecture, which combines design and ecology to analyze and plan how humans interact with nature and the built environment. Large urban parks like Golden Gate Park and civic spaces like town squares are designed by us. I got my start in the field by working for a nonprofit called Park Pride that designed, fundraised, and advocated for parks and green spaces in underserved communities in Atlanta. We maintained a strong connection with the community to better understand what they needed, and we worked with the city to get those things done. I now work for a firm called Vita as a designer, and I've worked on coastal restoration projects concerned with erosion control, lack of biodiversity, and sea level rise. I've also worked on an industrial brownfield restoration project like Mill District, as you can see, in Healdsburg, California, that incorporates green infrastructure improvements, extensive workforce housing, and community gardens. If we as planners are not considering the long-term impact of climate change, then we're not doing our jobs properly. This field has come a long way, and we have a strong understanding of what we need to do to honor cultural resources and combat climate change from an ecological perspective. But what we lack is human empathy. Cities are becoming more and more efficient, but women are not at the table to help inform the decision-making process. So certain needs are overlooked. In Sweden, the city of Stockholm went through a process called gender-balanced budgeting, which helped inform their decision to plow the snow of side streets and sidewalks before they plow the main streets. This is because while men would commute to and from work and needed the main streets to plowed, women often used side streets to run a number of errands or were more likely to walk with children in tow. Reversing the snow clearance order reduced the number of people admitted to the hospital for snow-related incidences, especially women, and it made their lives easier, while it had little to no impact on men who were not bothered by driving in a few inches of snow. I've often been the only woman in the room or the only person of color, but more often than not, both at the same time. Like many others, my field took a huge hit during the last recession, and not many people, especially women, returned to the industry. Now there's a huge gap in knowledge and leadership, and I've had a difficult time finding a woman to mentor me. Out of frustration in 2019, my coworker and I started an initiative called WAVES, which is Women at VITA Empowering Success, as a way to spread knowledge and share experiences. We're now part of a larger organization called WXLA, which is motivated to foster a supportive and inclusive community. We have some systemic issues that are not unique to my field, but they set us back from achieving the common goal of landscape architecture, which is to protect the public's health and safety and welfare. And it distracts us from our vital goal of mitigating climate change through policy planning and physical design. Thank you.
Mireya and Ermelinda, as mothers and seasoned practitioners in community sustainable agriculture, tell us a little bit about yourselves, your work, and how you and or others have been affected by climate impacts and different forms of oppression and injustice.
Muy buenas tardes a cada uno de ustedes. Nos da mucho gusto estar aquí. Gracias por la invitación. Yo me llamo Mireya y mis valores universales son la valentía, la dignidad y la interconexión para mí y para todos. Tengo el placer de trabajar para una organización sin fines de lucro que se llama Esperanza Granja Comunitaria, o en inglés es Esperanza Community Farms. Esta granja está aquí en el Valle del Pájaro, en Watsonville, y pues ya llevamos 3 años desde que se formó la organización. Yo, a nivel personal, soy originaria, bueno, me considero originaria de México porque ya crecí desde chiquita, desde meses a los 6 años, pero técnicamente nací aquí en este país. Cuando mis papás me trajeron al país, yo tenía casi 7 años y me acuerdo, mis papás eran campesinos, trabajaban piscando uva, espárragos, cherry, calabaza, de todas cosas. Y yo pues desde chiquita corría detrás de ellos mientras piscaban la verdura. Me acuerdo que mi mamá muchas veces se la pasaba cantando y parecía muy alegre porque pues al final a ella le gustaba mucho estar al aire libre y trabajar con la tierra. Soy mamá de 2 hijos y tengo más de 25 años viviendo en el Valle de Pájaro y estoy agradecida con el equipo que tenemos en la granja. Voy a hablar más acerca de eso en un momento. Disfruten las imágenes que estamos compartiendo con ustedes. y le paso el micrófono a mi compañera Hermelinda.
Hola, buenas tardes. Estoy muy contenta y gracias por invitarme a este panel. Le voy a hablar acerca de mí. Yo soy Hermelinda Vázquez Matías, soy originaria de Oaxaca, México. Una de las razones por que emigré a este país son para tener una mejor vida. Tengo viviendo en California 15 años. Cuando llegué a este país, yo he trabajado de todo, lavaplatos, limpiando casas, cuidando niños, de todo he trabajado. También trabajo el arte que yo aprendí en mi estado, que son los alebrijes, nos identifica Oaxaca. Y también el bordado hecho a mano, las blusas, yo lo aprendí de niña. Una de las razones que he decidido estar en esta granja, la Esperanza Community Farm, es porque me he identificado con las familias, los niños. Hemos aprendido y a valorar lo que la tierra nos ha ofrecido, los vegetales orgánicos. Me siento bendecida y con toda la familia las familias que hemos compartido estas actividades, porque se dan cuenta los niños especialmente de cómo nacen, sembramos y cosechamos, cultivamos todas las plantas orgánicas. Y todo esto tengo enseñanzas de mi padre yo crecí de niña en el campo aprendiendo a sembrar, a cosechar y a comer los vegetales. Entonces, es una gran oportunidad esta que yo tengo para trabajar para esta comunidad. Y gracias.
Muy bien, gracias, Hermelinda y Medea. Y qué hermosa su granja anclado en comunidad. Let's switch and return back to your original audio channels for the next 2 questions and responses. I just want to say too that it's so nice to get a peek into all of your lives as you all represent so many different aspects of what it means to be a woman in your field of work. So let's move into your expressions on climate solutions and how we can collectively foster and cultivate women's leadership in all sectors of society. We'll start with you, Natasha. I just love that you and your colleague decided to create a mentorship program for girls in your community. So the first question is, to help foster more equitable opportunities for women, what kind of support do you think women need to be able to not just overcome barriers, but thrive in the workforce and contribute to creating a more fair and inclusive climate solutions?
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you for moderating this. What we need are women's voices in order to find more creative solutions to the problems we face, especially the construction industry. It is a very male-dominated world. There are a lot of barriers to entry for women, including a lack of access to childcare, pay inequity, and discrimination. Some solutions we are working on include continuing education for licensure with an emphasis on designing for climate change, developing stronger mentorship programs, as we mentioned, and reaching out to schools, as not a lot of people even know that this field exists. Other ways that people can get involved is to speak up around your community, join initiatives or advocacy groups like Regeneration, or start your own organization. So, thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that, Natasha. Well, I couldn't agree more. While there's still a lot to be done, each of us can do our part by creating forums like this, right, to engage in more dialogue and strengthen our talent pipelines and educational offerings, joining or starting similar mentorship or peer group initiatives like you did. And Nayeli, given that you're a graduate of the National Mentorship Program Girls Inc. and now a leader in sustainable energy, can you give us some examples of clean energy solutions and how women in particular can provide a unique perspective in developing and implementing them?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. I think first of all, it's important to note that there isn't one technology or policy that's going to fix it all. But as Natasha said, we need everybody at the table so that we can get more ideas. To mention just a couple, in terms of the huge portion of the population that does not have access to modern energy, as I mentioned earlier, there are technologies like efficient cook stoves that use less wood, or also biodigesters to get cooking gas from agricultural waste. And these technologies are already being adopted by women all over the world. And I think that as more women adopt them, they will build on them and they will improve them and they will adapt them to their own needs. I actually once met a woman whose house burned down. This was a woman who lived in a village in Peru. Her house burned down after a cooking accident on a sort of old-fashioned open stove. And when she rebuilt her home, she rebuilt it with a more efficient stove. And she became an advocate in her community for other women to do the same. And I think that's a really inspiring story. Another thing I can mention is community solar, which we are all familiar with solar energy, of course, but not everybody can have solar on their roofs, for example, and not everybody's electric utility actually gets their energy from solar. So community solar is an innovative application of an existing technology because it allows people who, because of some reason, they don't have the ability to put roofs on their pan roofs, maybe because they're renters or they live in a multifamily building. It allows them to participate in a solar farm somewhere in their state, ideally as local as possible. And in that way, they support clean energy and they actually save money as well. A third and last example I'll mention is regarding energy storage. We all know that wind and solar energy are clean and they're great, but unfortunately we can't turn them on whenever we need energy. So ideally, we would be able to just store it and use it when we need it, which we do to an extent, but the batteries that we've had so far, the conventional ones, are just not very good at that, or not very good for that application. There's actually a woman named Maria Squilas Casacas who invented an alternative technology, and it's one of the most promising ones now for this application of renewable energy. And it's interesting because she has said that she was afraid of math and science when she was little, but she was encouraged by a math teacher. And I think this just is one example of how clear it is that women really bring something to the table, bring a lot of things to the table. And there are now more and more studies that also show this with numbers, but I think also individual stories are really important too.
Yeah, definitely. Wonderful, Nayeli, thank you. And also, if our audience wants to learn more about these solutions, please feel free to direct message any one of our panelists during the discussion. And lastly, also, I just want to say too, there's a lot going on right here in our region that Nayeli touched on a little bit, and I'd be happy to connect you if you want to learn more about that as well. Lastly, Mireya and Ermelinda, given your wealth of knowledge and experience from individual to cultural to collective aspects of systems and institutional change, what's your call to action? This will be our last question for the panel, but what's your call to action to our audience? And are there any resources or ways to get involved that you'd like to share as it relates to supporting and developing women leaders to advance a more climate resilient future?
Sí, gracias por la pregunta. Me quiero asegurar que las personas cambiaron de canal para que nos puedan entender.
Yes.
Bueno,
That reminder.
Esa es una buena pregunta, Ashley. Esa pregunta que se hace muchas veces. ¿Cuál es el llamado a la acción, verdad? Y es una buena pregunta, pero estaba yo pensando, no hay una sola solución, ¿verdad? Para abordar este tema y interrumpir el cambio climático.
Sí.
La verdad es que para nosotros nos ha funcionado mucho pensar en términos de un marco que se llama los 4 niveles de opresión y cambio. Quiere decir que estos 4 niveles, el nivel personal, interpersonal, institucional y cultural, debemos de activar estrategias en los 4 niveles a la misma vez, de una manera coordinada para poder ver un cambio sostenible a largo plazo. Entonces, en nuestra granja, por ejemplo, lo hacemos muy intencionalmente y el hecho de estar aquí con mi compañera, por ejemplo, que es miembro de la granja, el hecho de estar hablando en nuestro idioma natal, por ejemplo, el hecho de que tengamos un equipo, o sea, nuestro equipo, al que se le paga, todos somos personas mexicanas, indígenas o chicanas. Y eso tiene mucho que ver con la urgencia de interrumpir sistemas racistas y poder presentar un modelo alternativo a los sistemas que nos oprimen a todos y todas, en todo lugar. Mi llamada a la acción sería, hay que ser todos intencionales con las actividades y las decisiones que tomamos en cuanto a nuestro interés de interrumpir el cambio climático. Y hay que hacerlo con audacia, se dice. Hay que hacerlo, aunque se sienta que puede ser un riesgo, hay que hacerlo con la seguridad y la esperanza de que va a haber un cambio y que ese cambio nos va a beneficiar a todos. A las mujeres, no lo dije anteriormente, somos marginalizadas por ser mujer y por ser, en este caso, mujeres no blancas, no nos identificamos como blancas. Entonces, desde ese punto de vista, hay mucho que se puede hacer. Hay que escoger qué nivel nos toca y hacerlo con intención. Le paso la palabra a mi compañera.
Gracias otra vez. Yo quiero compartir algo. Porque dice que hay que dejar un consejo y compartir con la audiencia. Entonces, yo quiero compartir, por ejemplo, cuando vamos a comprar la comida, tenemos que como analizar, decidir y dónde lo vamos a comprar. Entonces, nosotros como estamos trabajando en la granja, vemos que la comida, los vegetales son orgánicos. Entonces, cuando vamos, ¿dónde queremos ir a comprar? A veces nos vamos a comprar como en las tiendas, pero en las tiendas sí nos damos cuenta que ahí está más económico y a lo mejor podemos agarrar un poco más, pero no estamos viendo la calidad del producto. Y decidimos para ahorrar también el dinero y ahorrar el vegetal que vamos a comprar, porque a veces compramos mucho, pero lo que nos vamos a comer es muy poco. Entonces, eso, yo quiero compartir con eso que cómo vamos a planear, a comprar nuestra comida. Tenemos que analizar, planear y dónde lo vamos a hacer. Entonces, esto es lo que quiero compartir con ustedes. Gracias.
Nuestro sueño es que cada familia en el Valle de Pájaro esté conectado con una granja. Imagínense cómo lo hacemos con un doctor, con una escuela, con un psicólogo, con un parque. Así debería ser. Hay que localizar nuestros recursos. Esa es una raíz muy importante para el cambio social.
Y otra cosa que estamos apoyando. Estamos apoyando.
Vamos a empezarlo.
Sí, a lo local.
Ya.
Eso es lo
Muy
más
bien, gracias a los dos. Sí, estoy de acuerdo con sus respuestas y vamos, let's go ahead and switch channels for a second. Once again, I absolutely love that call to action. Pause. I mean, as a former instructor of gardening and nutrition in schools, I know for a fact it makes a world of a difference for young children and families and businesses to know where their food comes from and understand what it takes to grow, like you said, to relearn the value of labor. It's powerful. So we are approaching time. We could talk for hours, for days on this. I'm sure we have some questions queuing up now in our Q&A. And I think we have time for about 1 or 2 questions. So let's go ahead and move into that box. Okay. So the first question we have here. Okay, what might solutions to our climate crises look like if viewed from the perspective of a brown or Black girl who is also poor? Thank you for asking that. If any of our panelists want to take a stab at that. It's a big question.
I can answer, and I'll do it in English. I'll be brief so that my compañeros can answer. It's a good question. I think part of the answer has to do with relationships and experiences. For the asker, I'd say ask a young brown girl directly, build a relationship with that brown girl. And you'll, because the answer that she's going to give is her answer. And it's a partial answer because there are many young girls. And but it's through relationships, as far as I'm concerned, over time, that we can truly begin to understand at a really physiological level what that answer even means, in terms of how we can turn that into action.
Mm-hmm.
I can write an answer in the chat. I can tell you what I might have said when I was 10, but I think getting out of our head is an important part of how to inform ourselves towards this idea of taking action for social change and climate change.
Thank you, Maria. Nayeli or Natasha, would you like to add to that?
I think that was an excellent response. The only thing I would also perhaps add to that is, from that perspective, you have to see it in terms of short-term needs rather than long-term goals. Climate change is, we are seeing the impact of it today in terms of forest fires and pollution and sea level rise and storm surge, but how that impacts someone on a day-to-day basis is just that financial security and stability, and not knowing if there's going to be food on the table, if there's going to be work tomorrow, if there are going to be those answers. So that I think while we are tackling the bigger issues of climate change, we also have to tackle the societal impact of that and what that means to young women and young girls.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with everything that's been said. I'll just briefly add that I think it's really important for everyone, or for usually a poor brown or Black girl would not have a say in this, but that doesn't need to be the case, because no one is going to understand the problems that this girl faces, then no one is going to understand them more than she does. So I would say, look at what you are, look at what you're facing, what challenges you're facing in relation to climate, and look at what resources you have. That may be wisdom from your mom, that may be something in your school, that may be some research you do online, some course, it could be formal, informal relationships, and anything, but find out what resources you have, and then try things out. A lot of great ideas happen that way, just identifying a problem, trying to fix it, And you never know, sometimes really great things happen, and before you know it, other people are also adding to your ideas. So just I would say the first step is to do something about it, to identify and empower yourself, identify your problem and empower yourself to do something about it.
Yes, that's great. And I would add to all of that, please reach out to us after this conference. If there's no one that you feel comfortable reaching out to in your community, I'm sure there are. It might take a little bit of research in the beginning, but there could be other individuals on your campus, within your community, within your neighborhood, or in your family. And if you're not finding organizations that you relate to, please reach out to us and we will help connect you. That being said, unfortunately, we do not have time to answer the rest of the questions in the Q&A box right now. However, like I mentioned at the beginning, we will take them and answer them in an email format and send them to you after the forum. So thank you again for your participation, and for everyone that's been commenting in the chat box as well. Thank you for your comments and your advice and your suggestions and your questions. I wish we could have all of our panelists, continue to speak on all these issues, but like I mentioned, we'll be in touch after the forum. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your ancestral wisdom and for being your authentic selves with us today, for your diligence and your grace in the fight for justice. Like you all alluded to, there's no silver bullet. It'll require all of us to close the gap and to nurture women's leadership so that we can all expedite equitable climate solutions. So again, please reach out to us, send us a direct message, or be in contact with the organizers at Regeneración to get in touch with us. Thank you all for your time and attention. I'll turn it back over to Natalie. Mahalo, ladies. Hope to see you soon.